To my immediate family, it was obvious for years that I was all set to crack up under the burden of unresolved hurt, which I had carried since early childhood. Like most depressed people I've now had the opportunity to interact with, I, however, was in complete denial and refused to consider seeking any kind of professional help or intervention. Things came to a head around my 60th birthday when I found myself totally overwhelmed and incapacitated by a sense of defeat and hopelessness at how I had been so unfair to my own self, and whether there would still be time and opportunities available to me in the life ahead to redeem this sense of self-betrayal. Once this defeatism got hold of me, the slide into an abyss of despair was all too rapid. Anger with my own self soon translated into anger at all those I had loved, leaving them perplexed at this new resentful being that was living in their midst. One night, I walked up to a railway track near my home and waited alongside it to muster the courage to throw myself under the next incoming train. After waiting for 2 hours and the passage of 4 trains, I realized that the fear of physical pain I would have to endure would not allow myself to take the final step. I returned home, humiliated at my own cowardice, and immediately started contemplating less painful methods to end my life. My family, in the meanwhile, had spent the entire 2 hours scouring the entire neighborhood to try and locate me. There was palpable relief when I returned unharmed, but also complete alarm at how close they had come to losing me. The very next day, I was taken to a senior clinical psychologist who diagnosed me as suffering from severe clinical depression and deep anxiety. I was put under immediate psychiatric care on an outpatient basis and lived there onwards in a haze induced by multiple antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, and of late, even mood stabilizers. Life now became about following a strict routine. Though I forced myself to continue working and stuck strictly to a daily regimen of exercise, I ended up losing all spontaneity, motivation, as well as any remaining self-confidence. I told my family that if I could get through the day, one task at a time, I would pat myself on the back before passing out into a drug-induced sleep every night. In spite of the high doses of medication, a simple altercation at home prompted my second attempt at self-harm. At this juncture, there was a broad consensus that I needed to be admitted into a psychiatric rehabilitation facility for my own safety and subsequent treatment. The next 5 weeks were spent there, totally isolated from all interpersonal triggers, as well as with no access to a cell phone. All communication with my family had to be routed through my counselors, and it was a good 2 weeks before I was allowed any meeting with them. Spending this period inside a world whose reality most people on the outside are totally oblivious of was one of the most cathartic and enabling periods of my life. It brought me face up with so much pain and suffering that my own suffering suddenly seemed disproportionate. Seeing the alternations of guilt and anger of fellow patients, often resonating with their feeling of isolation and abandonment, and listening to their stories with empathy, opened up my own being to that reservoir of spiritual wisdom that I had walled in when I became so telescopically obsessed with my own pain. In finding answers to help the other patients develop a more nuanced perspective to their problems, I soon started facilitating that much-needed shift within myself. Being in an environment where no patient bothered to judge another, I learned to stop judging all those whom I had hitherto evaluated harshly and held responsible for my pain. In helping others heal their psyche, I soon found the tools to help me reclaim my own self from the deep morass I had allowed it to slide into. These tools would emerge from my subconscious, mostly as poetry and often as art inspired by gleanings from ancient Indian spiritual traditions. To those outside my immediate family, the fact that I was suffering from deep depression and extremely low self-esteem would come as an absolute surprise. I was an extremely erudite intellectual, a responsible community leader, and a successful business owner held in very high esteem in an extended circle of family, friends, and community. Compelled to shoulder responsibility for my family since a very young age, I had gone through life as an enabler and support to anyone who had sought my intervention. No one could imagine that I could be so frail and damaged on the inside that I needed psychiatric treatment and had to be admitted into a rehabilitation facility. I come from a generation where issues of mental health were never acknowledged and had a huge social stigma attached as a result. My first instinct was to tell my family to keep this knowledge under wraps and spin a tale to account for my prolonged absence from work as well as my community. They complied with my request, and a narrative was set up about my participating in a yoga and meditation retreat where I had no mobile access. My 5 weeks at the facility, though, brought to me the acute need to create awareness and acceptance of mental health issues. I would not need to conceal the fact that I had diabetes or say a cardiac issue. So why did I feel impelled to cover up my mental illness? I instinctively knew that if I wanted to remove the stigma associated with mental illness, I had to destigmatize it in my own mind. I would need to be honest and share the story of my journey with depression and subsequent need for hospitalization. More than medicines and counseling, sometimes all that a mental patient needs is a sense of being listened to sympathetically and being cared for. We were a motley bunch of patients with issues ranging from depression, psychosis, schizophrenia, substance abuse, amongst others. I have a huge degree of respect for all the psychologists, doctors, attendants who spend hours every day trying to improve the lives of the patients, most of whom grapple constantly with a sense of isolation and fear of being permanently incarcerated there. In a bid to create a sense of family with fellow patients, I began organizing group activities like word games and karaoke evenings with them. Just seeing the joy and enthusiasm amongst those otherwise confined in a bleak world of individual misery, I now realize the need for people with empathy to consider volunteering at these rehabilitation centers. Who knows which stranger or what new group activity will facilitate the needed shift in any mental patient. I have a twin objective behind this sharing. The first is the hope that my own reflections and poetry could help facilitate a shift in the consciousness of any mentally distressed individual or their caregivers and help them on the path to recovery. The second is that by sharing publicly my own experience and battles with depression, I can hopefully help remove the stigma and create more awareness and empathy for those suffering from mental illnesses. I hope in the long term to foster a community of people who are enthused to work for mental rehabilitation. The disease takes its toll not only on the patients but also their families. My heart goes out equally to anxious parents of children that spend weeks hanging about the facility, not knowing if and when their loved ones will ever recover. They all need our support and empathy. I will continue this journey through the poems and insights that emerged during my 5 weeks of recovery, with a prayer that I will manage to succeed in achieving both these objectives. Amit, Gujral.